seen a lion full grown get thrown in the air and do 2 backflips.
In spite of the danger, if they were going to learn how to tackle such massive prey, the young Mapojos would need to be right in the middle of the action.
Cubs will learn very important things from watching the rest of the pride hunt. They're learning how to secure very rewarding prey in the future, so they will become bigger, they will become stronger and healthier.
Spotted pride often used to take their youngsters with them on the hunt. They would follow not too far behind the adults. As happens 90% of the time, the buffaloes ended up turning on the lions and chasing them.
The pride adults tried to retreat, but the young Mapojos and their siblings were caught in the middle of the angry buffalo herd.
It's like a tempered bowling ball through skittles when they come running in. Lions run everywhere.
They must have chased them some distance, and in doing so, these youngsters must have just got caught in the traffic.
A large herd of buffalo will go search out cubs that are hidden in bushes and throw them around, stomp them.
They will try and gore it with their horns, but pushing down with the boss to squash it. And that's how they actually kill it.
I do recall quite a lot of sadness around when a couple of the cubs of the spotted pride were killed.
Some of the Sparta lions were killed by the buffalo. The 5 young Mapojos were lucky to have escaped. It seemed like destiny had other plans for these brothers.
If those cubs had not survived, that whole Mapocho coalition would never have come into being.
Mr. T, Kinky Tail, Rasta, Scar and Pretty Boy had beaten the odds and all survived past their first year of life. But a new threat, another danger, lay just beyond the horizon. Females can fight to the death in defense of their cubs.
A lot of action, there was a lot of running around, there was fighting around the Land Rovers. At one stage I thought one female was going to go over the top of our Land Rover to try and get away from the males.
In all instances where the Mapojos started killing cubs, the females tried to protect the cubs, but the Mapojos were just too strong for them.
A raging male lion out on a mission to do one thing, and that was to kill the cubs. Those lionesses had no chance.
With the mother's defenses broken down, there was nothing standing between the Mapojos and the Ottawa Pride's young cubs.
When you've got a team of 6 working to find you, it's difficult to hide little ones that can't keep up. And so that's how they were picked off slowly.
The whole Ottawa Pride, I think, had 11 cubs in it. They were all killed.
When you see males killing cubs, it's a very heart-wrenching thing for anyone to see. Even as a biologist, I know it has a function, evolutionarily, it's very difficult to witness.
When they lose their cubs, females soon come into estrus, which enables them to breed again. Exactly what the Mapojos needed in order to perpetuate their own bloodline.
over a period of about 3 months. Every cub that we had here, the whole lot were killed by the Mapocho and eaten. Mr. T and Kinky Tail, those two in particular, were quite bad in how intense they were of actually ensuring that they found and killed those cubs.
A quarter of all cubs that die in their first year are killed by male lions. It's a natural part of a pride takeover.
Seems like from all the stories that we've heard, that Mr. T was the most vicious of all these lions.
The violence normally ends with cub infanticide, but the Mapocho coalition was anything but normal. With the resident males of the Ottawa Pride gone and their cubs killed, the Ottawa females would soon be fertile once more. But with the 6 Mapojos coming into their prime, oozing testosterone, the competition amongst them to breed was intense.
Boiled over to the point where we even saw them kill lionesses that were in estrus, willing to mate with them. And not being able to decide, the 6 of them would turn on her and pull her apart.
First thing I saw was Mr. T. He was busy biting into the back of a lioness. And then he started suffocating her. It took about 10-15 minutes and eventually the lioness was dead. And after that, Mr. T proceeded to eat her.
Some of the behaviour that's been described for the Mapojos in terms of killing females certainly sounds unusual. Killing females from within a pride, females that they've already been breeding with, and they might have cubs with, is very unusual behaviour and something that I certainly haven't witnessed in the wild.
Over the next year, the Mapojos took over pride after pride, killing any lions that were a threat.
I don't think any of us can be certain as to how many lions were eventually killed by the 6 Mapocho. You could see that the population had dropped because of these guys.
At one stage we estimated that they killed more than 100 other lions in 1 year in the Sabi Sands.
It's an extraordinary number. It seemed that with the Mapojos in power, no lions in the Sabi Sand were safe. The Mapojos looked unbeatable. The only threat to their power now came from within the coalition itself.
The biggest fight I saw was between Mr. T and Makulu.
By 2008, the Mapocho coalition had overthrown many dominant males and conquered a vast area. An area so large it was previously divided into more than 5 separate territories.
This is the first coalition that we had ever heard of that had claimed such a large territory. The distance that they covered pretty much dominated most of the Sabi Sands game reserve, which is close on 70,000 hectares.
That's over 160,000 acres, 7 times larger than Manhattan.
Somewhere like Sabi Sands, where you have dense prey, available water, and a high density of other lions as competitors, you're likely to have much smaller, more condensed territories. The fact that the Mapojos took up almost all of the Sabi Sands as their own territory is really a testament to how powerful a coalition they were.
With all their competition eliminated, the Mapojos now controlled more than 8 prides. They were the undisputed kings of Sabi Sand. But for some of them, that wasn't enough.
We often think of coalitions as
a lion was standing in their way.
Mokulu was definitely the dominant one of the Mapoho. He was a boss. The biggest fight I saw was between Mr. T and Mokulu. And it was Mr. T that came off second best. Mokulu managed to grab him on one of his legs and Mr. T was injured. That's where the split came. I think that might have been the reason, or one of the reasons, that the two left the fore.
For most field guides, just witnessing a coalition of 6 males had been a first. But having this coalition split into 2 groups was unheard of. But that's exactly what happened in 2008. Mr. T and Kinky Tail were 6 years old and in their prime when they separated from the older Mokulu, Pretty Boy, Rasta and Scar.
I'd never seen this happen where coalitions actually split up and set up 2 different coalition areas adjacent to each other.
When the 6 of them split, Mr. T and Kinky Tail ran the north central part of the territory, where the 4 remaining ran the western sector. Where I was based, it was Kinky Tail and Mr. T that ran the area. From us initially hating us because of what they were doing, they became our males. They became the males we knew and the males we grew to love. Mr. T and Kinky Tail looked like they enjoyed each other's company. Looked like they enjoyed being together. They looked like brothers. From then on, we very seldom saw any of the other boys.
They would still meet on occasions, but they definitely had 2 different territories.
Mr. T and Kinky Tail could now focus their efforts on having offspring of their own.
Lionesses feel safe when you've got a strong coalition looking after the cubs, not allowing anybody else to come and kill the cubs. It makes their life a lot easier.
We had quite a few cubs around. I think at least 15 of them between the Ottawa and the Shumungu pride.
Many prides, with many new cubs, filled the Mapoho's separate territories. It was the most peaceful time since the coalition was formed. With that peace came a new challenge: to be fathers.
Males are not generally patient with cubs, but Mokulu seemed to be the most patient with them. Numerous occasions we saw cubs climbing on him, pulling his mane, and he was always very tolerant of them.
to be a good father, it's not just that they have to give their cub a pat on the head. They actually have to be patrolling the area to keep strangers away.
Male lions patrol their borders for territorial defense. They use various methods. They roar, They scent mark, and they are patrolling physically just to show basically a presence in that area.
And all that is to warn all the other male lions in the area that this is my pride, this is my territory. If you come in here, we're going to fight.
In the western half of the Mapojos territory, one lion in particular took the lead for protecting the coalition's borders.
I often found Makulu away from the other Mapojos. He was all on his own. All I could presume is that he was patrolling his area.
He would be absent at times for a week at a time, and then come back and join up with them. This is because they had such a vast territory to patrol, and he used to do most of the patrolling.
Often we'd hear him roaring with his very distinct call that a lot of us could recognize.
I'm still yet to hear a lion roar like Makulu. He had one of the oddest but incredible roars of any lion. Where most lions will roar for maybe 45 seconds, a minute, and then rest. He would continue.
By 2010, it had been 4 years since the Mapojos' first takeover. While Makulu was making a show of defending his borders, his task was easy compared to Mr. T and Kinky Tail's defense of the East. Their entire eastern boundary joined the vast Kruger National Park, home to many nomadic males that wanted Mr. T and Kinky Tail's territory and prides.
There's always threat from somewhere, whether some nomadic male or some other large coalition of males that want to control your pride.
We'd seen quite a few young nomadic males come in from Kruger, and Mr. T and Kinky Tail saw them off every time. They were almost like the defenders. They were the ones taking the hits. The only way that other lions could get to Makulu and the three were through Kinky Tail and Mr. T.
For 2 years, Mr. T and Kinky Tail had fought off intruders, defending not only their territory, but also their brothers to the west.
They didn't realize that there was a coalition of 5 that we now call the Machingalans that were slowly making their way south.
Seeing off individual nomads was one thing, but for Mr. T and Kinky Tail to face a coalition of 5 males on their own was a challenge on another level.
The Jingalanis were big, young, strong, and they knew how to fight.
On the 8th of June 2010, a coalition of 5 male lions called the Majingalanis entered the northeastern section of the Sabi Sand. Since the Mapojos had first arrived, no one had seen such a strong coalition enter their territory. As a force of 6, the Mapojos were unbeatable. But since the split, it was left to just Mr. T and Kinky Tail to defend their eastern territory. Now it was the Mapocho's turn to be outnumbered. It was 2 against 5.
Because it was Mr. T and because it was Kinky Tail, because they'd never lost a fight before, there was no reason for them to believe that they couldn't handle this intrusion. But the Majingalanis were big, young, strong, and they knew how to fight.
I didn't know what to expect. I did not know what was going to happen. I was scared.
This young male lion came hurtling across the road. You could see something was wrong. But I never expected to see Mr. T and Kinky Tail right behind him.
They just shot out of nowhere and they chased him for about 100 meters.
Having isolated one of the Majingalani intruders, Mr. T and Kinky Tail went on the attack.
Mr. T grabbed him behind the neck and rolled him, and Kinky Tail climbed into the groin straight away.
It was roars and the most terrifying sounds. That was hair-raising stuff to see.
Mr. T was raked numerous times in the face. I remember him going in and the young male actually locking onto his ear. Mr. T had to shake him off, almost ripping his ear off. But all the time while he was doing this, Kinky Tail was doing damage to the groin and the back legs. And he roared. Kinky Tail roared while he was doing the damage. He had a mouth full of lion and he was roaring. I've never seen that or even heard of that before. I've never witnessed anger, aggression or power like that ever.
Majingalan just didn't give up. He kept on fighting back as well.
It was 2 heavyweights against a middleweight and he lasted. We heard what it sounds like for a male lion to scream from pain.
It was with mixed feelings that I left the sighting. At that stage, I was just quite relieved that it was not Kinky Tail and Mr. T on the receiving end of this brutal fight.
The injured Kinky Tail and Mr. T spent the day nursing their wounds, while the Majingalani was left to die by the roadside. Once more, they had successfully defended the coalition's territory.
I did go back that evening. Kinky Tail was nursing a badly injured right paw. I think he possibly got bitten through the paw.
Later on during dinner time, I just heard roaring on the open area and around the lodge. Suddenly, one of the rangers came knocking on my door and the only words he said was, "Grab your camera and come."
It didn't take long for Karin to find the source of the noise. The Majingalani intruders were on the move.
We were following the Majingalans up the road. And I thought, no, I can't believe this. It's going to happen again.
It was as though the Majingalani were coming for revenge.
They'd made quite a bit of distance on us, so we had to try and catch up. And as we dropped through another little dip and came up on the far end,
we just saw a cloud of dust and roaring, growling.
A massive war broke up.
Still, we were not sure who was who. Only as we got closer, we saw that it's definitely one of the Mapogos with the 4 Majingilans on top of him.
It soon became clear that it was Kinky Tail being pinned down by the 4 intruders. He was injured but fighting to escape.
They were savage in their approach. I've never experienced something quite that brutal. They were starting to take him apart limb from limb. One was between his hind legs, damaging the genitalia, the soft underbelly. And then suddenly there was a snap that sounded like a gunshot.
You could hear the spine breaking.
Lots of blood. And of course it's so much more vivid when you see it happen right in front of you. The smell, the sound, the sight of it all, I think it's a little overwhelming.
Suddenly Mr. T came from nowhere. He came from the side, attacking one of the Majingilans.
Kinky Tail is mortally wounded, but it doesn't stop Mr. T from trying to save his brother. Taking on 2 Majingilani.
He tried to help his brother, but he knew he could do nothing.
He tucked tail and he ran. 2 individuals that were still anchored on Kinky Tail peeled off. And they followed their brothers and went after Mr. T.
If caught, Mr. T would meet the same fate as his brother.
Kinky Tail was breathing very, very deeply.
Nobody said a word. You could hear a pin drop. As much as we would like to save a life of an animal, but there's no way you can interfere. There's no way you can do anything.
Mr. T managed to escape. The Majingalanis went back to finish what they'd started.
We could hear them coming for at least 10 minutes before they actually arrived, and then in the distance we could see them coming down the road.
They knew they had him outnumbered and injured. There was going to be no room for him healing up and ever being a threat ever again. They were going to end him then.
By then we knew Kinky Tail's fate was sealed. He was going to die. Seeing Kinky Tail being ripped apart, it was, I think, one of the worst moments in my life. One of the most difficult things for me was to see the reaction of the Rangers. They were sad. You know, they experienced it in a more emotional manner.
I heard about Kinky Tail's death that evening and I cried. It was a lion that was my favorite lion. I really enjoyed him and I was upset by it. I broke the news to a lot of the guys the next morning on the radio and there was a stunned silence. Guys didn't believe it. Guys didn't want to believe it. And I think there were quite a few tears shed.
next morning, we all left the lodge. We wanted to see and to know what happened during the night. As we got to the site, what we found there was shocking. We found a hyena and 2 black-backed jackals feeding on the remains of Kinky Tail.
He was gone. Such a big, proud lion. There was nothing left.
One of the most emotional thing that I've seen was a black-backed jackal running away with a mane of what used to be a big, majestic male lion. And that was the last I've ever seen of Kinky Tail.
Soon after the death of his brother, a badly injured Mr. T was seen moving west.
Mr. T decided this wasn't for him anymore. Not as a one-man band. He couldn't hold that territory.
I think Mr. T knew he'd lost his closest companion. His brother, his friend, somebody that would do anything for him. I think he also knew that he'd lost ground with regards to territory.
Mr. T's natural instinct was to return to his coalition brothers.
We hadn't seen him in almost 2 years. And that morning we could see Mr. T from about 80 to 100 meters away. He was just watching them.
Makulu and his Western coalition had families now, cubs to protect. Instinctively, Makulu knew all too well what can happen when a male enters another lion's territory. Mr. T may once have been like a brother, now he was an intruder. Mr. T had managed to escape the Majingalani coalition, who had torn Kinky Tail apart and taken over the brothers' eastern territory. Now he headed west, where Makulu and the remaining Mapohos were still kings. The volatile Mr. T had been responsible for breaking up the strongest coalition ever to reign in the Sabi Sand. How would his return be received?
Makulu Mapoho wasn't happy that Mr. T had come back. Yet he was accepted by the other 3 Mapoho that were here.
It's very remarkable that he was able to rejoin his 4 colleagues back in the main coalition after that time.
The field guides were relieved that Mr. T was accepted without bloodshed. But Mr. T was Mr. T. These were not his prides, and they were not his cubs.
We expected Mr. T to accept the coalition's cubs, but he didn't.
I don't think any of us could imagine what was going to happen. None of us were prepared for it.
It was only a matter of days where he started to massacre all the cubs.
He would actually go and seek out the cubs that belonged to the coalition and actually kill them and eat them.
what was interesting, the other males didn't seem to do anything about it.
Many of these youngsters were Mr. T's nieces and nephews, but his brothers seemed unwilling to stop the carnage. Mr. T intended to take over the prides and mate with the lionesses, but the coalition's cubs had been standing in his way. So he brutally did what came naturally. The power in the west had shifted. Mr. T was the new king.
Once Mr. T had come back and killed all the cubs and established his dominance over the others, from then on we weren't sure what was going to happen. I think most of us had a fairly negative feeling about the situation.
For the next 2 years, the Majingalani slowly ate away at Mapocho territory. The intruders took over most of Mr. T and Kinky Tail's land, their prides, and almost certainly killed their cubs. During the long stalemate, more bad fortune struck the coalition when Pretty Boy and Rasta disappeared. It was suspected they were killed by the Majingalani. The mighty Mapocho coalition once ruled all of Sabi Sand. Now they were barely holding on to power.
There were only 3 of the Mapocho left. There was Makulu, Mr. T, and there was the Scar male.
For 6 years, the Mapochos had been kings of Sabi Sand. Male lions don't normally survive in the wild longer than 12 years. Mr. T was 10, Scar 12, and Makulu was now 14.
They were getting older, rivals were rising nearby, the end was inevitable.
On the 16th of March 2012, yet another coalition of 5 males called the Salatis entered Mapocho territory from the south.
Early on morning drive, we turned off the car to just listen for something. We heard quite intense roaring coming from not more than 100 meters in front of us.
And we followed the tracks. It was quite clear to see that the Salatis were after the Mapocho.
They were young and strong. They were still getting into their prime, so they were ready for a fight, I think.
They had singled out one of the Mapocho, which one we weren't sure of.
Any aging lion would struggle in a fight with so many young males. But that didn't stop one of the Mapochos from defending the last of his territory.
By the time I arrived at the scene, Mr. T had already been attacked.
The last Mapocho king was fighting for his life, and he was alone.
Had a big bite into his spine, just above the back legs, and he was paralyzed from the back legs down. This made him very vulnerable to the attacks from all 4 lions that were coming at him at once.
The tactic they were using, and in a very ruthless way, was to sort of distract him one way so another male could bite him in the spine.
They knocked him over and would just maul him and bite him for 15, 20 seconds. And then they would stop and they would move away. They would then get up again, they would come back, and the barrage would start again. Mr. T by that stage would have been fighting for his life. I can remember him looking back at me. The fact that he was still able to get up and still try and take on the coalition after they'd ripped him apart gives you an idea of the strength and character of this magnificent animal. The 4 male lions that were attacking Mr. T were roaring constantly. It was the sign of a takeover. They were in charge now. And they were roaring and they were letting the whole world know that they were in charge.
It was a very intense sighting. The emotions going through you ranged from excitement to disbelief to awe. Big gaping wounds where his spine had been bitten down to, and just a very subdued lion with his head down on the ground, his paws forward and his back legs useless.
There was no comeback from this. Mr. T was going to die, and he was going to die that day.
My brother and I were there, and we literally watched him take his last breath.
To see an end to an era like that does have an emotional effect on you, and I'm not sure that I would like to see that again. Very emotional ending to the whole Mapocho saga.
I think Mr. T, he lived like a male lion, then he died like a male lion.
He went out the way he probably would have wanted to have gone out, protecting and fighting for territory.
After the Mapocho's 6 years in power, the most violent reign in people's memory had finally come to an equally violent end. Makulu and Scar were the last of the Mapochos. Way beyond their prime and heavily outnumbered from all sides. Their only option was to leave the Sabi Sand. The Mapochos will never be seen here again. But there is hope for their future generations.
The Mapocho bloodline that I'm aware of that still lives on is within the Ottawa Pride. There's 3 big adult females. They have 2 sub-adults at the moment. But I'd like to think hopefully Makulu Mapocho fathered those females.
The fact that his cubs were the ones that actually survived the onslaught of Mr. T. And I think it was sort of a bit of justice there.
The more I hear about the Mapochos, they are an incredibly interesting group of lions, and they are to some extent the ultimate lion. It may seem that their behavior is evil, it's very aggressive in terms of a human point of view, but ultimately they are being the best lions they can be.
The 6 Mapojos did what male lions have to do to survive, and pass on their genes. But they took it further. They set new standards for conquering territory and exposed levels of violence never before witnessed in the Sabi Sand.
There is such a dark side to lions that isn't often highlighted. It is cute and it is amazing and it's regal and it's beautiful.